Hi folks, I'm Bill McBirnie and we're here for what I guess is essentially the third edition of Essential Practice. And in keeping with the previous formats, essentially what I do here is illustrate how I practice, which consists essentially of playing along with recordings. Interestingly enough, my practice regimen has evolved over the years. But now I really don't do any scales or long tones or technicals or studies or exercises. All I do is play with whatever I'm listening to. And this is a really important part of learning how to improvise. Um, the way I do it now, I sort of play along with whatever I'm hearing, so I extemporize. For those of you that are not as advanced, it's probably best to play only what you can hear. You'll get the most out of just playing what you can hear, rather than effusing to no meaningful end. Um, so play what you hear, and if you're interested in improvising, then no matter what stage you're at musically, I think it's important to devote a portion of your practice regimen to doing what I do today, which is all I happen to do myself. But many of you will be, junior or intermediate or even advanced players who have a maintenance regimen that you want to adhere to, or you're just developing your musical foundation, your technical foundation. So you have to devote time to scales and arpeggios and learning various and sundry things. But whatever you're doing musically in your practice session, if you're interested in improvising, you really have to engage your ear early in the process. And even if it's difficult and a little bit frustrating and you're not good at it first, which you won't be, I know I've lived through it, it's a good idea to devote a portion of your practice regimen to what I do here on these essential practice sessions. So these are also occasions for me to just show a little bit of what I do as an improviser. So I usually pick a handful of tunes and play along with the tracks, and maybe make a few comments either before or after. And in fact, I'll do that right now. I'm just seeing what I set up here. Um, the the first thing that I'm picking here is by an excellent singer by the name of John Finley. Um, he's been around for a while. In fact, in the late 60s, early 70s, he was in a band called Rhinoceros, under the Elektra label. But he's done lots of things since then. But I believe this is his first album, rather late in the day for him, and it's really an outstanding piece of work, and it's very soul oriented. Um, John Finley also had the presence of mind to team himself up with a really excellent writer, arranger, composer, piano player, sort of music director, and his name is LOU POMANTI. And I've done a little work with John in sort of, I guess, casual or jam situations. And over the last few years, I've also done some work with Lou in various situations, as leader or sideman or what have you. And uh, uh, Lou is really an amazing musician, but he's also quite an amazing person because um, he's got fantastic people skills. I've seen him in so many situations, and even if things kind of might fall off the rails a little bit, he knows how to deal with it. He's really, if he's on the gig, it's excellent. So anyway, um, Lou Pomanti is the sort of the writer arranger on this session, and keyboard player with John Finley. And in fact, this particular tune, Lou had a hand in writing it as well. So what is this tune anyway? Um, it's entitled Go, and it's from John Finley's album, which is hot off the press. It just came out this month. And the name of his album is simply Soul Singer. And it's very apt, because, I mean, that's his thing, and he does it really, really well. So this is John Finley with Lou Pomanti on a tune entitled Go, which is from his most recent album, probably his first album, in fact, Soul Singer. See if I can just call it up here. Okay, here we go. Am I ready?
Just feels good. Then that all what comes next? Make a little hit, straight from the hip. Turn out the light. Middle of the midnight. Now just start with no destination. Ain't got so
Whoops. You got a little hint, I guess, about the next track that I queued up. But in any event, that is John Finley singing a very funky tune called Go, accompanied by LOU POMANTI on keys, and he did all the arranging, and he had a hand in the composition of that tune. One thing I might say is I would never do what I just did if I were actually dressing that track, because I was playing way too much, and the musicians amongst you will recognize that fully. But as I say, I was sort of practicing along and trying to catch the vibe or the groove of the tune. But I would play a lot less if I were actually accompanying him in the studio. I did at times sort of pick up the odd little fragment. Um, so I did what I should do briefly from time to time. But actually, what we might do is just have a look at the tune. That happened to be in A, the key of A, and it's sort of a bluesy, minor-oriented tonality, and it actually went to another key along the way. It sort of oscillated between A minor and C minor. So when you're playing this kind of music, the first thing to do is try and identify the key areas, and then identify some note choices that are consonant with that key area. And by and large, like a blues scale will work fine. So in A, that's the A minor pentatonic, which is a C rooted on A, C major pentatonic rooted on A. For a blues scale, you just add the flat 5 or the plus 4, and you have the blues scale, and a lot of the note choices that you make are going to rest on those melodic pivots. And in fact, John himself, that's almost all he's singing, with a lot of glisses and swoops and so forth. But when you're playing this kind of idiom, sometimes you can sort of make it a little more sophisticated by throwing in a little bebop, for example. Be very careful, because bebop is actually sort of a different idiom. So if you're going to introduce it, you have to be judicious about it. Don't just lather the whole thing with bebop lines. The other thing is, sometimes if you just confine yourself to the one pentatonic, it'll get a little boring. You know, it does sound a little bit, which gets boring after a while. So you can look for other pentatonics that are still consonant with that key area and that maybe flush out some of the higher end of the chord structure, and are still consonant with the key area. So for example, if that was an A minor, which pentatonics might work? A minor pentatonic on the 5th will work, and the 2nd might, although you're getting the natural 13. How about maybe the flat 7 on G, a major pentatonic? But that's just the E minor, sorry. Let me just play a little bit of the track, and I might have to switch to C when he switches to C. And I'll try and play some of these alternate pentatonics for a little bit, and also I'll introduce some bebop and show you how it might work. But you have to do it with a measure of care. So let me just call that track up a little bit and play some of it again. I'm just going to drop in anywhere in the middle of the track, because it doesn't matter. Let's see what happens. As I say, maybe I'll start with the alternate pentatonics, and it might sound a little forced, and then I'll try a little bit of bebop carefully. Here we go. Couldn't help myself. I love John. Anyway, that was a little ragged, but actually the first part of that I stuck to those 2 alternate pentatonics. And you see, they kind of fit and they sound a little different, and less of that kind of thing. So just finding some alternate pentatonics to work that are consonant with the key area is a very helpful melodic device to introduce some more melodic interest into your lines. Okay. And the last thing I might mention there is, often I let the band hit. We often feel we have to be playing all the time. Often at cadence points where it's obvious you sort of want to land or hit, I actually back off and let the band hit by itself, and it's sort of interesting, the dynamic it creates. Let me just play a little more of that just to show you what I mean. Here we go.
Never gone before. That's where you
So I indicated with my hand there where I backed off very deliberately to let the band hit, which creates its own interesting kind of rhythmic dynamic. And sometimes people don't know what's going on. It feels very groovy and it's very simple. And the interesting thing is that musically what you've done, instead of adding something, trying to play something, you subtracted something and not played. So you can get interesting, meaningful, and musical results that way. Okay, maybe let's have a look at the next track that I selected here. This is by a Cuban musician who's been living in Canada for a long time now. And he's really an outstanding and versatile singer, really excellent singer, and guitarist, writer, arranger, composer, band leader, you name it. His name is Luis Mario Ochoa. And I've done a little bit of work with him in my past, and this is a very Cuban thing, but it's going to be a more relaxed track. It's essentially a bolero. It's very, very beautiful, and what was I going to say about it? It's a bolero, it's relaxed, it's Luis Mario Ochoa. I should mention the name of the tune and what album it's on. It's entitled Cosas Del Alma, and I think that translates into Things of the Soul or something like that. And this is actually from his first album, which may be very hard to get. It's kicked around for a long time. And that first album is called La Cubana. So this is a tune by Luis Mario Ochoa, and SIMAO is the name of his band, SIMAO. And this is a tune entitled Cosas Del Alma, and I hope I make the changes on this one because it's very beautiful. I'll try and we'll just see what happens. When you're improvising, often things don't go strictly according to plan, so we'll just see what occurs in this instance. Here we go. So Luis Mario Ochoa, Cosas Del Alma, and a very beautiful bolero. Take another run at that. Just going to change it a little weird in the intro.
No hay nada
there's a hint of the next track. I guess I got it already queued up. But I had my reservations about that. Once again, I should mention that when I'm playing along here, I'm really playing far too much, and I'm really trampling over Louis in this case, and I hope you'll forgive me for that. But I'm sort of trying to find notes and shapes and contours, pardon me, that are relevant to the vibe of the tune. That piece happened to be in G, and it moved around a bit, but it was fundamentally in G. What might I say? Maybe I'll say something about the last note. I actually sustained that for quite a while, and you notice that I let it decay. Often, especially flute players, they feel that they have to be creating a correct sort of sound, a full sound that's strong and riddled with vibrato, quite frankly. But often, it's a good idea to exploit the other sonorities and acoustics of the instrument. So on the last note there, whatever was happening, I mean, there's lots of things that can happen. Maybe I'll just play the last phrase and see what happens if I just play the last phrase again. There were some funny changes there, and I might not catch them exactly, but let's see. Let's just try again and see. There's funny changes. Back to that track. I'm just going to take a little more of the ending there and see what I can come up So in any event, there was a lot of not necessarily great horsing around there. Or in the studio, I'd probably take a few runs at it and let them pick whatever they wanted. But there are, sometimes I'm playing lines. I'm often playing against the time. I'm deliberately not trying to mark the time carefully, but play against it so it floats a little more. And sometimes there are flourishes, like just runs all over the place to give it some kind of momentum. And as I said, the last note, I was trying to do that again, just letting it decay and letting the listener hear a little bit of the wind against the back, just breaking against the back wall of the embouchure hole, as opposed to, you know, that's the way people might want to end it. But it's sort of like with compresses and swells. So that's much more intimate, and it's got a little more emotion attached to it. And the strange thing is you're letting the instrument do what it wants and not being too preoccupied or fixated on creating a correct or proper sound. That's probably a principle I learned from Ben Webster, because Ben Webster has a very interesting sound, and often he does that. He's not trying to create a perfect sound. It's very beautiful and it's very personal, but he lets you hear the reed, maybe even a little bit of saliva, but you really hear the entirety of the horn. So it's a good idea with the flute to try and maybe follow the same principle from time to time. And the other thing I noticed there is handling of the vibrato, especially in the last note. I really took the pacing of the vibrato down to it's a snail's pace. So vibrato can be, you know, that's often the way people hear it, but you can vary it in terms of both pacing and depth. So that can be very interesting in the course of the line or in the course of a note. And usually a throat vibrato works best. That's what's easiest to modulate as opposed to the vibrato that comes from the thorax or the diaphragm. Both are fine. I favor the throat vibrato just because I can exert real maximum control over it for just the kind of things that I illustrated there. For really controlling the pacing of it, the depth of it, and also just the degree of it, whether it's light or heavy. All right. So, can I say anything else about that for the time being? That may not have been my best work. Indeed, it wasn't. But I'd probably just play the track again if I were practicing, which I am, but I won't bore you with another take on this. All right, the last track I'm going to do here is something by a really talented guy, and this guy's absolutely amazing. Ever since I met him and heard him playing. His name is Luis SIMAO, and he's Portuguese. So we've got a couple of Latin things happening. Luis Mario Ochoa on the Cuban side, and Luis SIMAO now more on the Brazilian side. Luis is very remarkable because he's a multiple instrumentalist and vocalist. He sings, he plays guitar, piano, accordion. Of course, being the creature that he is, he'll play some percussion. But what is remarkable is that he's Canadian, and he was raised in Brampton. And he developed a real affinity and respect for his heritage. Because when you hear him singing Lusophone music, for example, authentic folkloric Lusophone music, I mean, it's the real deal. And it's astonishing to me that someone grew up in Brampton, which is just outside of Toronto, and developed this capability. But, you know, he's got, as I say, he's got a tremendous respect and understanding for his heritage, his tradition, and it really comes out in all of his music. I've done a lot of work with him in the past, and it's always a pleasure to play with him because he just knocks me out every time. So, and that's just one side of him, by the way, because he's also an excellent jazz musician. So I'm trying not to leave anything out. So Luis SIMAO, this is from his album, his most recent album. He only has a couple out. He did one with a great accomplice reed player, David French, called Failla. That was the first album. That was done quite some years ago. This is Luis SIMAO's own album, and it's a much sort of bigger project. He's done all the writing, all the arranging, and the title of the album is LOU. It came out, I think, last year, maybe the year before. But it's a great album. It's a very interesting and diverse composition of things. And this is I believe it's the opening cut from LOU, and it's Brazilian in nature. It's entitled Cantador, which translates into a troubadour. One of Luis' collaborators is an excellent musician himself, guitarist, singer, writer, and in this he's often contributing lyrics, and his name is Wagner Petrilli. So I believe Wagner probably wrote the lyrics to this one. And joining Luis on this is a woman who was on my last episode 2 of Essential Practice, which was Patricia Cano, great singer. So Patricia Cano is also assisting Luis SIMAO on this tune called Cantador. So this is more Brazilian in flavor. This one is harmonically much more challenging. Oh, and strangely enough, I'm actually on this cut, but I'll try and ignore myself. But I know the track is the places that I was playing were like fills, and they're like what do you call them, vamps, where the tune is resting or just roosting in one key area. I'm gonna have to sort of play the whole thing in this case, so I'm hoping I cut it all, and I'll try and ignore myself in the background, as I say. So here we go with Luis SIMAO and Cantador. I better do that from the beginning of the track. Let me just think about that. Okay. So here we go. I don't want that. I just take another run at it.
Cantador pode jurar se não ouvir a voz soar. Não canto a dor, só quero paz, fazer sorrir e propagar a bênção na minha voz.
So I was actually imitating myself a little bit on the way out there. I caught a couple of figures. So that's a very beautiful tune. It's actually rather challenging to to make all of the changes, and I'm not sure that I did successfully. Um, but there are tunes, there are points along the way in the tune where it sort of rested in a key area. I think a couple of them were E and D flat at the end there. Um, and what I was also doing, pursuant to the tune I mentioned at the start, I was incorporating a little bit of bebop into the tail end there. Um, uh, as I say, you have to do it with some care. But what's interesting about bebop is that it's a very relevant idiom. Most good improvisers spend some quality time learning something about bebop and developing some understanding of the vocabulary because it's very, very rich in terms of melodic and rhythmic devices. There are tons of things that I've learned from bebop, transcribing solos, learning um, um, things by Bird. I got the, where is it here? I probably actually have it on my shelf somewhere. Um, I never use books anymore. But in any event, I had the so-called Omni book by Charlie Parker, and I bought it in all three keys, C, B flat, and E flat. And I probably covered about a third of those tunes, working them very, very carefully. The ones in C I could play along with his recordings and see if I can match him in every nuance. First of all, learn it. And it was just like a classical study, learning those things, getting them under your fingers so that they sit properly, and then getting them up to speed, and then proceeding to play them with the track and see how close you can play with Bird. But it's challenging stuff, admittedly. You might not be able to start with that. But I learned a lot about melody and rhythm from bebop players, and I still invoke bebop. To me, it's a little like the blues and or the blues scale. It's amazing where you can introduce it in situations where you might not expect it, and it can be very refreshing. And you don't do it sort of. You have to do it with a little care. If you're very crass about it, then it sounds crass. So like not done with any tact or delicacy. Same thing with bebop. And even if you're not going to become a bebop specialist, and you don't have to as an improviser, you can pursue your own voice and your own inclinations. But I really do feel that bebop is fortifying, no matter what you end up doing. It's fun, it's challenging, and it will really broaden your melodic and rhythmic scope. Learning something about bebop. And there's lots of great boppers. I mean, whether it's Bird or Bud Powell or Clifford Brown, there's tons of them. I always like Cannonball Adderley. Cannonball Adderley is excellent because he's got that soul funky thing happening in conjunction with bebop. So Cannonball Adderley has been certainly one of my big influences. Now we got a long ways from Louis SIMAO's Brazilian tune, didn't we? But this is something of a free-ranging exercise, and I wonder if we've done about enough. Is there anything else I can say here about Louis SIMAO? Great musician. Haven't worked with him in a while. Maybe one day, but then no one's working with anybody now. Let me see. We've covered John Finley with LOU POMANTI on some soul, and that was pretty basic melodic stuff because it's largely a blues scale, and I told you about maybe pursuing some alternate pentatonics that are consonant with that key area just to get yourself a little bit away from just a straight blues scale, and that happened to be in two keys. I remember now it was, actually I don't remember, I think it was A minor and C minor. Then we looked at Luis Mario Ochoa's very beautiful ballad, and that was a Cuban-style bolero, and that was a much more relaxed thing. And then we did Louis SIMAO, which was Brazilian, and that's I think by way of summary, I'll just make the point again that I was playing far too much on all of those tracks. And actually, I feel a little wired. I probably had too much coffee today. So that meant I was playing too many notes, as it were. It's that simple. Let me suggest something on the way out the door here. And I intimated at this earlier. As an improviser, it's a risky undertaking, and you can't be sure of what's going to happen and if it's going to go well or not. And certainly it's difficult to make it go according to plan, strictly according to plan. So it's one of those things that you accept about the nature of the undertaking, and don't let it bother you, because that's actually what makes it so intriguing. It's like the thrill of the chase, and that's what it's all about, sort of seeing what will happen. Of course, when you're playing, and especially if you're improvising, you're posed with almost like an infinite number of choices about, well, what am I going to play? And there's always that problem. What am I going to do here? And the risk is inevitably to do too much. And I think this practice session probably demonstrates that big time. So what I'm going to suggest to you, and maybe I'll try and live up to it in a subsequent session, is when you're playing, by definition, you can't play everything you know at once. So you're engaged immediately in a process of sort of editing. So what is it that you're going to play? Because you can't play everything. Now that should give you courage to initiate the undertaking, because you can't do everything anyway. So you're going to do something that's sort of nice, and it can be short and it can be sparse, just to get things started. As you get more advanced, you've got tons of options and tons of choices. But when you're starting out and you don't know what to do, try and find something very simple and groovy and maybe responsive. Think call response to what's going on around you. And as I always say, if you're ever confronted with a choice about, uh-oh, what do I do now? And the basic choice is to play or not to play. Often the choice not to play is the better one. Just wait until you feel connected to whatever is going on. Just wait, because that's also interesting in the process of improvising and making good music, music that's meaningful and will connect with the listener. Often the process involved is not addition, like playing more and more and more and more and more, but actually playing a little bit less. And so the process involves not addition, but subtraction. And I want you to remember that principle about improvising. And that also gives you courage, because it's like you don't always have to be adding stuff. You don't always have to be playing. You can actually think about not playing for a while, letting a phrase go by, waiting, and maybe getting inspired by something that's occurring around you. Or you hear something, and away you go. So I think that's probably enough for today. I don't like to let these go much over 45 minutes or so, but maybe on the way out the door I'll just see. There's, yeah, I've got some comments, and I'm glad to see Klaus Anselm here, the trumpeter. I've done some work with him in the high schools teaching. Brendan Cassidy, a great reed player. Tim Harrison, a fan of mine. He says, "Crushing it, Bill." He said that at the 9-minute mark, and then I think he must have checked out because he realized it wasn't going to get any better, and that it was a good chance it was going to get worse. Anyway, I thank you all for listening, and if you're inclined to contribute anything, there's something in the narrative there about the tip jar. You can always buy a couple of CDs or my new book, which has actually been doing very well. And it's called The Theory and Technique, or what is it? The Technique and Theory of Improvisation. So it's a practical guide for flautists, doublers, and other instrumentalists. So it's not confined to flute players, even though there's a picture of my hands on the cover. All right, folks, I think that's about it for today, and I really appreciate your stopping by and listening, and perhaps to be continued. I'll see how the returns are on this one. That's it for now. So long.